Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. Today, I want to talk to you all about this zombies comic, which contains a bunch of storyline, and specifically how this comic disagrees with the KRONORIUM. Because Richtofen reads the KRONORIUM, and then sees a timeline, and that timeline is something that was released by Treyarch during Zombies Chronicles, as we all know, and there seems to be a discontinuity between that timeline and what we see in here, which is bizarre, but it's making all of our discussion of Blood of the Dead and the transit crew, Victis, after Blood of the Dead, much more difficult just because of this weird quirk. It's like a constant question mark hanging over things. So what we're going to do in this video is zoom through the key events of this, and then I'll go through what happens in the timeline, and we can isolate the point that doesn't make sense, and then talk about why it might be the case. And I'm going to share with you some information from Craig Houston, the lead writer of Zombies, who I talked to at the world reveal for Black Ops 4, and he basically commented on this a little bit, but even with his answer, things are still a little bit weird. So let's jump into the comic book for now. We basically see the transit characters going about their days, fighting through a bunch of zombies in various locations, like, they're in the empty earth, they're fighting the cyborgs at one point, which is where they secure the KRONORIUM from, and then they go into the blood things here. A little bit later on they teleport, and then we eventually see them teleport once again, once the zombie Richtofen has those blood vials from them, and then normal Richtofen teleports them out. They finally get their portal open, and that's what we see here. This big blue light opens, they step through, they're like, well, okay, we should probably go, guys. Hopefully this is the last portal. And then they enter what appears to be, strong emphasis on appears, it appears to be the house. Now the reason I say that is that if we compare this to the trailer that we had, I think actually you could compare it, for example, to the Revelations intro, where the crew arrive and Richtofen gives Maxis a hug. This really looks like that area. It really, really looks like it. You've got some kind of like wardrobe-y type stuff going on here. You've got a computer that kind of looks like one of those Gorod Krovi computers. You've got this control panel by the telepad. That really looks like the basement of the house. And the other trailer it really looks like is the one where all the kids are teleporting in, and you see like little Nikolai, and he stands on the pad. Monty's there at the top of the stairs, and little Nikolai like walks through the basement. That's the house. That's not Alcatraz, right? So this looks like the house. He says, "Sammy, it's me, Edward. Russman thinks this guy looks familiar. The intelligent reanimate that has been following us, it resembles him. I know that voice. Sammy?" And then we get to this quote, and this one is the key quote that really makes things weird, okay? He says, "We should be quiet. The kids are asleep upstairs." Okay. There's not really an issue there. We're in the house, right? No big deal. The kids are asleep upstairs. It makes sense. The transit crew have just teleported to the house. No big deal. Then in the next frame, are you the voice in my head? Didn't I introduce myself? So at this point, he doesn't even know that he's a Richtofen. "My name is Dr. Edward Richtofen. I've been trying so very hard to do the right thing. I brought you this." He gives him the book. "Oh, wunderbar. I cannot wait to read it." He goes through, reads that, da-da-da-da-da. Life is good. Now, in this reading of the KRONORIUM, he learns about the blood vials. That's something that has happened in this kind of 2-page bit of exposition. They basically say he reads the book, he learns about the blood. Then, he says, "Do you want to live?" "Yes." "Well, in order to do that, I need to go on a little journey." And so down here, he basically says, "When I return, you can go with me and see if I can save all your lives, or you can stay on this world and I can send you wherever you want to go within it. Although, honestly, it's all pretty much equally terrible. You have until my return to decide." So he's saying, I can send you anywhere on this world. Now, if that's the house world, then that's a bit weird, because in the house world, it's kind of insinuated that only the house is nice and everywhere else is just trash. Kind of. Like, well, that's actually a 50-50 one. It's a perfect world, in theory. He says here, though, the world is equally terrible, so that doesn't seem to really match a perfect world. And it doesn't seem to match the pre-perfect world house, which is what Maxis seems to be living in pre-Revelations, essentially. And that's where it seems like the house is nice, but everywhere else is terrible. Anyway, you have until my return to decide. He leaves, goes and visits zombie Richtofen, and then he goes through another portal, and he goes to Alcatraz. You can see this is Alcatraz Island. He says, "Alcatraz, always the long way around. but necessary to secure the additional blood required for our insurance policy. He then goes and visits himself at an unknown point in time early in his timeline and says, "Trust me, Edward, you will need this blood. When the time comes, it will protect you." And then the key point here is that he has just secured the blood of Sal and Finn from Alcatraz. He's gone and given it to himself, and then he says, "Back once more to this cursed prison. I know the rules are different here, perhaps different enough. I suppose we shall see." And he steps into an elevator. Now that elevator seems to take him down behind a bookcase, specifically, back to the transit crew. They are waiting there in the room that they were originally in. And he says, "Well, have you made a decision?" "We have. We want to live." They go into the cryopods. "We're trusting you." That's all good. They enter the pods there. And then we have, in this next frame, there's a jump there from the cryopods to, wunderbar, right on time. And we see the very final page, and basically that's Primus arriving and collecting the blood vials. Who the hell are those guys in the pods? Just some old friends. Don't worry, they're safe. And then Primus leaves. So, up to that point, we have a series of events happening that require a bit of explanation, because basically it looks like, for all intents and purposes, it looks like the transit crew arrive and meet Richtofen in the basement of the house. And then he leaves to get the blood of Sal and Finn. And then he gives the blood to himself. And then he returns and he says, Alcatraz, I'm back. And then he goes downstairs, and it's the basement that previously we thought looked like the house. Now there's an issue there, and that's that he said, "Be quiet, the kids are asleep upstairs." You're not going to say that in Alcatraz. You're certainly not going to say that in the lab of Alcatraz, unless he's trying to pull the wool over the transit crew's eyes and make them think that they're not in a prison or something. It's all a bit bizarre though, to be honest. And really, it just doesn't make any clear sense. Why this place that looks so similar to the basement of the house is just being referred to as Alcatraz despite being styled as the house. So, we can now compare this to the timeline and see what really happened, even though it still doesn't really make me feel any better about this. Okay, so in the timeline, we get to the entry of the manipulation of Stuhlinger. Having seen the construction of the lab under Alcatraz, Richtofen returns to the house, where he begins to communicate with Stu. Together, they persuade Victis to travel to a variety of locations in order to recover the KRONORIUM. So when all of the communication with Stu is happening, he is in the house. So that's ongoing. Stu is being manipulated by Richtofen, and together they are kind of manipulating the rest of the Victis crew. Now we know that on July 3rd, 1941, Ferguson reports the lab is completed and the subjects will be placed in stasis upon their arrival. That is the day before Victis actually wraps up their quest, and so July 4th, 1941, Richtofen returns to the lab under Alcatraz where he meets Victis. So this is now saying that in this panel where Victis arrives, Richtofen has just come from the house to meet them here at Alcatraz. But this doesn't look anything like Alcatraz at all. It looks nothing like it. And he says, "We should be quiet, the kids are asleep upstairs." Huh? Excuse me? What? We then hear all the things that we see in the comic. Upon reading the KRONORIUM, Richtofen discovers numerous timelines documenting the fates about the blood vials. He would later write on the page, "I know what I must do." He enters a rift, gets the blood of Sal and Finn. That's just something that we've just seen in the comic. After delivering the blood to his younger self and recovering the blood vials belonging to Victis from zombie Richtofen, he returns, and Victis is placed on ice to be kept safe until they are needed next. Primus arrives to collect the blood vials, and then following their departure, he learns the location of the summoning key and travels to his next destination. So the timeline fits what we understand to be happening. There's no real issue with what's happening in the timeline, because it matches Black Ops 3 just fine. It's just the fact that this does not look like Alcatraz at all. This looks like the house. Very, very clearly looks like the house. And then he says the kids are asleep upstairs. It just doesn't seem like Alcatraz. Now, the only thing I can think of that rationalizes this is that maybe when he says, "Be quiet, the kids are asleep upstairs," by the kids, he means the prisoners. It's a bit of a reach, but he'd have to be like, "Don't wake the kids," meaning don't wake all those pesky little toddlers, little prisoners. It's a reach. It's a real reach. Now, I asked Craig about this at the world reveal, like I mentioned at the start of the video, and he said, or at least I believe this is what he said, I might have misheard him or misinterpreted or something, but he seemed to say that basically the issue that had happened is that somewhere in here, I'm actually turning too fast, lovely chair, go back, there we go.
Smooth.
Somewhere in here, there should have been a frame or a dialogue box or whatever you want to call it that would say later, ... And that would indicate the passage of some time. Now, if that was the case, it still wouldn't fix the problem. Because they'd arrive, they'd go through their stuff in the house, which would break with the zombies' timeline. That would just not match at all. But then they would go through, and we'd get to a point maybe... I would say the most likely point would actually be after he returns from the prison. Like, the most likely point for a later is here, when Primus arrives. And so we'd say that they get into the pods there, and then there's a later, and then Primus come and get the blood, and he's like, right on time. That would make the most sense to me for a later, but that wouldn't fix the fact that he says back to this cursed prison here, when the characters seem to not be in the prison, they seem to be in the house. Like, every part of this just screams not Alcatraz. Like, this friggin' ornate wardrobe they've got in the back there just doesn't seem like the house. The entire styling of everything, the way this desk is set up, the whole thing really seems housey to me, but apparently is not. So Craig, if you're watching this video, I don't know what you meant about the whole later thing. I don't think that fixes the problem, because it's a problem as soon as they arrive, because as soon as they arrive, it looks like the house. Now, I guess the later thing could have been an issue on the KRONORIUM side with the timeline. If that's the case, that's a yikes from me, dog, because I can't figure out how that would work in there either. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. Like, he brings... No, it just doesn't really work. So, ultimately, what I'm trying to voice here is that it seems like the takeaway is that they're in Alcatraz the whole time. But it's just a bit weird that in here, it so doesn't look like Alcatraz, and he doesn't describe it as Alcatraz when he's talking about the kids. I just think it's strange. I think the Zombies comic and the Zombies timeline are kind of broken because of it in a very small way, but a way that would significantly impact our understanding of what would be happening in Blood of the Dead, and so I wanted to basically signal boost this now and just get people talking about it a little bit. I talked to Reed about it the other day, and he was like, yeah, no, it doesn't make sense, so I'm not alone in this. I think it's just a bit weird, alright? This has been a slightly shorter than 56-minute long story video from me. That 56-minute long video is going to be on the screen right now if you want to watch it. That was a long one. We used the whiteboard to go through a bunch of stuff. None of the stuff that I was saying made sense in the whole, but it made sense in individual pieces that I was trying to glue together, and I think that it's a really valuable watch because, while I don't necessarily figure out the key to the whole zombie storyline in that video, I do bring up a bunch of different threads that I think are vital to our understanding and give them a bit of attention that I think they really deserve. So, that's on screen right now. Thanks for watching. I'm MrRoflWaffles. Like the video if you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.